It's February 25th, 2018, and this is your scripture reading and devotional for today. The scripture reading today is Leviticus chapter 10, verse 1 through chapter 11, verse 23, Luke 14, Psalm 28, and Proverbs 5, 21 to 23. The devotional today is another clip from the lesson, A Woman's Touch, from Luke 8, 1 through 3.
And then we see a woman's touch in evangelism. Without evangelism, the church would die. We are commanded to evangelize. We just referred to Matthew chapter 28, verses 19 and 20. And again, that is a general statement that is clarified by more specific teaching. That would be like saying, to say that Matthew chapter 28 commands everybody to be teaching everybody would be like going to Hebrews chapter 2 and verse 12 and seeing there where it says, I will declare your name to my brethren. In the midst of the assembly, I will sing praise to you. And say, well, see there it says sing, so we can sing anything. We can sing everything. Well, no. There's more specific teaching on what it is we're supposed to be singing. We're supposed to be singing songs, hymns, and spiritual songs. Psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. So it's specific about what kind of things we're supposed to be singing. Not just singing everything. You know, we don't sing the national anthem in our worship. Good song. But it's not a worship. It's not a one that fits that category of psalm, hymn, and spiritual song. And so we look to the more specific teaching to clarify for us when Jesus said, make disciples of all nations, who's teaching who? And we see over and over again that the women are teaching women and children. We don't find examples of women teaching men. Evangelism must be done by everyone. In Acts chapter 8 and verse 1 it says there that when the church was persecuted, they were scattered. And then in verse 4 it says those who were scattered went everywhere preaching the word. Well, do you think there were any women in that group? Well, of course there were. But who were they teaching? I think that there's a good example of that when Paul goes to Philip's house and Philip had 3 virgin daughters that prophesied. And yet Agabus, a prophet, a male prophet from somewhere else, came to prophesy to Paul. Well, if there were 3 virgin daughters there in Philip's house that prophesied, why didn't one of them prophesy to Paul? Because it would not have been appropriate. It would have contradicted the teaching of other passages. And that's not what we find. A woman's touch in evangelism is seen in a lot of ways. Women can do great work in evangelism. Women support the preaching of the gospel. We just saw in Luke 8, 1 through 3, how they were supporting Christ as he went around preaching the gospel of the kingdom. In Acts chapter 16 and verse 15, you see the example there of women being involved in the teaching work of the church. As it says, and when she and her household were baptized, Lydia, she begged us, saying, if you have judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come to my house and stay. So she persuaded us. Now, how long Paul stayed with Lydia, we don't know. But the work that Paul was doing in Philippi, he was doing from Lydia's house. Until he cast the spirit out of the demon-possessed servant girl and he got arrested for it. Then he was in prison. But before he was arrested and went to prison, he was in Lydia's house. She was supporting the spread of the gospel in Philippi. Women tell others of Christ. You see there in John chapter 4, verses 28 to 31, how the people of Samaria learned of Christ. And it was because the woman at the well that Jesus had talked to went back into the city and told people there, come, I have found Christ. So she went to bring people to Christ. And I think that is significant, that she went to bring people to Christ. And so certainly that is something that women can and must do. Women speaking with or working with their husbands. Now, this is one of the examples where people will say, well, you know, you got the example there in Acts chapter 18 with Priscilla and Aquila and how they took Apollos aside and taught him the way more perfectly. And so there's an example of a woman teaching a man. Well, that's not an example of a woman teaching a man. That's an example of a husband and wife teaching a man. Just like when me and Mary go and have a Bible study with someone, it could be said that Mary and Norm studied the Bible with them. That's us working together in teaching people. Not an example of a woman teaching over a man. If that's an example of a woman teaching over a man or a woman teaching a man in spiritual matters, well, then that means that she would have been teaching over her husband, Aquila. And certainly that's not what took place there. So women are a great aid to their husbands in the teaching of the gospel, as we see in those examples. And when Peter uses an example of teaching by character, that is, that a person's character is what is doing the teaching, he uses the example of a woman with her husband. And he says there in 1 Peter rather, beginning in verse 3, wives, likewise be submissive to your own husbands, that even if some do not obey the word, they without a word may be won by the conduct of their wives, when they observe your chaste conduct accompanied by fear. So, women certainly can teach by example. They can teach with their good Christian character. As Peter uses that example there of how a woman can bring her husband to the obedience of the gospel by her good conduct. Without a word, he says. By her good conduct. And I know I've told you the story before about the woman who converted her husband who was very antagonistic toward the church. And how he would try to hinder her in every way from going to the worship services. Until one morning it had gotten so bad he met her at the front door with a gun. And he said, if you go to church this morning, I'm going to kill you. And she looked at him and she said, well, if you shoot me, I'm going to heaven. If you don't shoot me, I'm going to church. So make up your mind, because either way I'm going. And she did. And as the story goes, that man was converted because of her dedication, because of her character, because of her faithfulness. Certainly that's the most powerful way of teaching. As the saying goes so often, the sermon seen is much more powerful or remembered much longer than the sermon heard. And what greater Christian character can we look to than the good character of our faithful Christian women? So there is a great deal that women can do in the work of the church. And we need to emphasize that. We need to impress on that. Rather than constantly talking about what women are not supposed to do, let's encourage our faithful Christian women to be involved in the work of the church where they are effective in the work of the church, where they are supposed to be involved in the work of the church, so that we are built up and strengthened together by everyone doing their part.
Be sure to post your thoughts from today's reading in the comment section below.